your moderator in today's session. I'd have two logistical notes up front. We are recording this session for documentation purposes, so if you're uncomfortable with this session being recorded, I fear you would need to step out. Second, for those of you who prefer to listen to the discussion in French or Spanish, please be so kind to use the translation button, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom window. This year, and I'm sure you all have heard of it by now, marks the 10th anniversary of the Voluntary Guidelines on the Responsible Governance of Tenure of Land, Fisheries and Forests in the context of national food security. They often go by their acronym VGT or the Tenure Guidelines. So if you hear people refer to the VGT or Tenure Guidelines, they refer to the Voluntary Guidelines on the Responsible Governance of Tenure of Land. And as you can see from the title of the session, this event is about unlocking their potential. Now, at the end of last week, extensive debates were held on the value of the Tenure Guidelines and the achievements of their application so far. And I think this is not the place to repeat these debates. However, I would want to emphasize that the Tenure Guidelines have successfully informed other global processes, national policies, and open up the space really for local tenure reforms. And this side event focuses on one very important achievement in the application of the Tenure Guidelines. At UNCCD COP14, parties to the convention adopted the Hallmark Decision 27 that links the Tenure Guidelines to national level programs to combat desertification and drought and to achieve land degradation neutrality. Halting land degradation and restoring land is absolutely critical as the world faces up to the intertwined challenges of ending hunger, malnutrition, and poverty. And to varying degrees, also depending on the methodology, land degradation affects 20 to 40% of the global land area, undermining the well-being of more than 3 billion people. That is, urgent action is needed to reverse the pervasive impacts of land degradation to secure food and water resources. Maybe in short, there will not be resilient food systems without addressing the threats posed by land degradation. And further, we will not be successful in addressing the impacts of the multiple crises or the poly crisis, as they are called in CFS 50, that have been discussed if we do not put the legitimate tenure rights of people at the center of the efforts and investments to achieve land degradation neutrality. To support this, UNCCD and FAO have responded to the request by parties to the convention to develop a technical guide. This technical guide was well received by parties to the UNCCD at COP15 this year, where countries strengthened their commitment on land tenure and called for concerted efforts to further implement them at the national level. And this side event builds on and deepens these debates. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you. One last point, if you have any questions, please be so kind to leave them in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. This will facilitate us interacting with you. And now it's my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome the Director of the Land and Water Division at FAO, Mr. Li-Feng Li. Mr. Li-Feng Li, the floor is yours for your welcoming remarks. A warm welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, distinguished guests, dear colleagues from UNCCD, Land Portal Foundation, TMG, and FAO, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to you all from Rome. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this side event on unlocking the potential of the use of VGGT through land degradation neutrality. As just mentioned by the Ms. Chair, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the adoption of the VGGT by the Committee on World Food Security. And this event will be the opportunity to explore how the integration of the VGGT into land restoration initiatives can re-energize the joint efforts to enhance tenure security and unlocking multiple benefits from food security, poverty reduction, women's empowerment, to the prevention of conflicts over natural resources. Addressing governance of tenure and land degradation neutrality can come only from a collaborative effort by all stakeholders, as both are sensitive and complex. Also, I would like to highlight that this collaboration effort has been the one prevailing to the preparation of the joint UNCCD and FAO technical guide on the integration of the VGGT into the UNCCD implementation and LDN. The TMG has provided early support, and the civil society organizations, government, academia have been closely involved in multiple consultations, meetings, building up the case studies, and the reviews of the text. I would like to thank all of these contributors who have allowed the technical guide to be adaptable to national and local needs, flexible to respond to the different drivers of land degradation, and action-oriented to allow all stakeholders to uptake the VGGT into their LDN initiatives. The English version of this technical guide has been launched in May at the COP15. We are now glad to announce that the technical guide in other 5 UN languages will be made available by the end of this year. So this side event is a reflection of this imperative of working together, and brings the panelists from diverse point of views, roles and possible actions in supporting both the tenure security and LDN. I would like to thank all of you for your participation and contribution to this event, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Thank you very much for these very kind opening words that really lead us all right into really the center of what this side event is about. Further, and as you can see from our really impressive lineup, we have Juliet with us. Juliet will be even giving the opening keynote. She's the global focal point for the UNCCD Youth Caucus. Juliet, we are very happy to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jim. Hope you can hear me very well. Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be with you this afternoon at this event that is looking at unlocking the potential of the VGGT through land degradation neutrality during the Committee on Marine Food Security plenary session. On behalf of the UNCCD Youth Caucus, I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants in this session. As the title of this session suggests, young people like myself are not immune from the changes taking place in societies within which we operate, nor can we be excused from making a difference when it comes to food security and nutrition. Today, many young people, especially women and men, have limited access to and control over land, natural resources, infrastructure, markets, insurance, finance, technology, knowledge, and skills. In Uganda, where I come from, we presently have 4 types of land tenure systems, and these really look at customary milo access of land tenure system, freehold and leasehold, where you find that leasehold is one of the most common systems where land is held on the basis on an agreement between the leaser and the leasee. So the leaser is Juliet, who owns the land, and just say who actually wants to use Juliet's land or even settle on that land. But this tenure system is not safe and secure, as the terms and conditions can easily be manipulated by the owner. So ownership can always be revoked at any point in time. Young people, again, like myself, from our different communities where we come from, are often not protected, especially here in Uganda, by these types of land tenure systems. This is because we are looked at as not competent enough to have full control over land, nor are we key stakeholders when it comes to land issues. While this might be the place in which we are viewed not competent enough, we as young people are key at promoting sustainable food systems, ensuring the renewal within the agriculture sector, and contributing to the progressive realization of the right to adequate food in the context of national food security, particularly involving countries I keep on referencing like Uganda, where I come from. There is potential to improve livelihoods and expand opportunities of employment and entrepreneurship in agriculture and food systems, which are very significant sources of socio-economic advancement for young people in rural and urban areas. While agriculture and food systems often do not provide decent work and dignified livelihoods, nor promote balance between the needs of different generations. The topic that we are looking at this afternoon, unlocking the potential of VGGT through land degradation neutrality, is very timely in the circumstances to which I have referred. Again, context, young person speaking to you this afternoon. It also comes at a time when the Committee on World Food Security, the plenary that we are having, is set to adopt the CFS policy recommendations on promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems for food security and nutrition. It is my hope that the session that we are having this afternoon will provide plenty of opportunities for us to exchange useful views, ideas, and experiences which will influence our future activities as well as present work while shaping agriculture systems, but also contributing to good governance for the future. I hope that through the UNCCD processes and through the implementation of the Tenure technical guide, we will learn that we're going to learn about today, the UNCCD Youth Caucus and the global youth can be actively involved in the dimensions and actions taken to improve tenure security for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliet, for your contribution, which highlights two aspects which are actually at the core of the voluntary guidelines. On the one hand, the guidelines focus in particular on people and communities in vulnerable positions. And I think in many instances, when it comes to land, the youth really fall into that category. And secondly, as you have referred to in your example on land leasing, the guidelines place a lot of emphasis on recognizing the legitimate tenure rights. And legitimate tenure rights are all those rights that, even if they are not considered or codified by law yet, but support people's food security and are inquired in good faith, that these are also legitimate tenure rights that need to be protected. So thank you very much, Juliet, for setting the tone here. Next on my list is Aurélie. Aurélie is Land Tenure Officer at FAO in the Land and Water Division. Aurélie is a good friend of colleague, and she will bring to you the technical guide that has been developed in response to the request by parties at UNCCD COP14 to develop technical guidance on that topic. Before you start, Aurélie, for everyone who's just joined, if you would prefer to listen to this session in French or Spanish, please do make use of the translation button, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with this logistical note, Aurélie, it's my pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you, Jess. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Dear participants, panelists, colleagues, it's a great pleasure to be presenting the technical guide today, also because, as it was mentioned by my director, it's the result of a collaborative effort where so many UN organizations, but government, CSOs, academia could have participated in. Let me change slide. I had to have an issue to move on the slide. Sorry for that. Okay, here we are. So it's been discussed a lot throughout the week and throughout the various CFS side event, but here it's important to understand that the VGGT as a soft law instrument that has supported to be the basis of the decision of UNCCD, their nature of a voluntary framework, a negotiated one agreed upon by the government, the only global framework that exists on good practices to advance governance of tenure, were the key features that have allowed it to get to the decision of UNCCD's parties to encourage their integration into the convention. So Another key element that have led to the decision and that are amongst the foundation of the technical guide is a scientific foundation, where in 2019, the Science and Policy Interface of the UNCCD have engaged into a key publication to see how enabling environment for land degradation neutrality can be improved. 4 elements were considered as key, namely the science policy interface, financial support to LDN, institutional arrangement, and policy and regulatory frameworks. For the 2 later, land governance is a key component of them. So meaning that it brings also to the realization that governance of tenure is absolutely foundational to support LDN achievement. And in this, from this scientific foundation, it has led to the possibility to bring in the decision 26 at the 14th Conference of Parties of UNCCD, where parties have encouraged themselves to integrate the VGGT into the implementation of the convention and have requested a technical guide to be created, to be formulated. And this was a very interesting exercise for all who have been part of it, because it needed to bridge a gap between 2 words. A word where land is more a natural resource asset that needs to be cared of. And this is translated through SDG indicators, for instance, the 15 within the SDG 15, but also within initiatives such as the Ecosystem Restoration Initiative or the LDN target settings mechanisms through publication. And another word where land is a right, is considered as a right, as a legitimate tenure right, and we will come back to that. And that was the word of the VGGT, which is also translated in multiple technical guides that needed to be all together bring into this technical guide supporting UNCCD party on how to integrate governance of tenure within their initiatives. So this has led to the formulation of the technical guide, where the scope, we didn't want to make a 500-page technical guide. It wouldn't have been that easy to read. So the idea is to have a technical guide that is a comprehensive entry point. It gives a bird's-eye view. And the idea was that it addresses mainly to policy and decision makers. Once that's said, the technical guide makes reference to plenty of other technical guides that have been published under the VGGTs, plenty of other publications that have been created not only by FAO, but by many other partners that are relevant to go deeper and to give answer for potentially a second level audience, which is land administrators and potential beneficiaries. 3 considerations go all through the technical guide, and they are important. They are at the core of also the VGGT. One is that it builds on legitimate tenure rights. So as Jess was mentioning, those who are already in legal frameworks, but those also who are socially legitimized. And this is at each country, in each context, that it needs to be seen which one are and how they can be recognized into law. A second key consideration that you will see all through the technical element that we bring then after in the technical guide, the pathways, I will come to that, is consultation and participation, meaningful, informed consultation and participation. So also taking into account needs for potential activities that will prepare this consultation and participation. And to have the third key consideration is to have a gender responsive approach. So going way beyond, it's not only the question of participation, but also empowered participation of women. So really concretely how it translates into legal framework, into the participation, into targeted training where it needs, key right literacy and so on. But first—
Only you have 4 minutes left.
Right, so merci. I go a bit faster. The technical guide is built around 9 pathways that I will now present. What were important to them is that they are voluntary. They can be country-made, tailor-made to national context. They are action-oriented. They respond to the why, how. So in each you will find a list of activities that can be both at national and local level, because often LDN initiative goes to local level. They are flexible. They are not all needed for all contexts. And we will see a bit how to think this flexibility. And they are rooted in the COP decision and in the VGGT text. There is a first set of 4 universal pathways, meaning that we have considered that all LDN initiatives could consider them. One is to have a look into policy and legal framework in a way that, do they recognize legitimate tenure rights? Is there any competition between LDN goals and tenure security, governance of tenure security goals, governance of tenure goals? A second one is how to create coordination, policy coordination mechanism that are both vertical and horizontal in order to ensure that various sectors can be around the table, various stakeholders, and also how can data can be shared in between those. Third one is about securing women's rights and access to natural resources. And a fourth one, which is absolutely key, is when there are LDN initiatives, it may trigger a change in value of land. So it's very important to ensure that there is a setup from the onset of the initiative, a grievance and dispute resolution mechanism to ensure that in case there are legitimate tenure rights that may be infringed upon, there is a way, there is a mechanism that allows to bring that forward. Then after, there are context-specific pathways. Those are designing tenure-responsive, participatory and integrated land use planning, where legitimate tenure rights can be taken into account into participatory land use planning processes. A 6th pathway looks particularly how can land banking and land consolidation be used to support LDN initiatives. And this is more in a context where land consolidation and land bankings as land administration tools already exist. And there is the 3 last pathway look at the various type of tenure system we may have. One is on public land. How can we recognize and document legitimate tenure rights on public lands? How can it be done for the commons? And how can be rights and duties be strengthened on private land? And all that, the idea for that, what we wanted to present, it's a process to take into account those various pathways within an LDN initiative. We suggest in the technical guide that it may start by 3 types of assessment, where the crossing result of a biophysical assessment, meaning understanding what are the land degradation drivers in specific context, but also what is the land tenure challenges met in specific context and the gender link to access and rights on natural resources, specific challenges in this same context. Crossing these 3, the result of these 3 type of assessments will help to see what can be the action and activities that can be taken upon in LDN initiatives. And with that, and seeing Jess, I thank you very much and ready for any question and very much looking forward to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aurélie, and I apologize for making you rush through the presentation. Thank you. Director Li-Feng Li has already mentioned that very soon the technical guide will be available in all UN languages. Currently, if you want to check it out, it's available in English on both UNCCD and FAO websites. Now, I have the pleasure to move to the first panel discussion. The panel discussion is called Moving into Implementation, Unlocking the Potential of the VGT through Land Degradation Neutrality. I will present the speakers in a row. The first one will be Daniel, and Daniel will walk us through what he calls a data story. So he will go first, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel. So Daniel Hayward is country research and engagement consultant at Land Portal, and he will present something that the Land Portal has recently compiled, which is called a data story on land degradation neutrality and land tenure. Daniel, I'm looking forward to your presentation. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Yes. And good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody here online. I'm quickly putting, you should just see in the chat box, I've just put a link to the data story I'm going to talk about. And now I will share my screen. So basically what I'm going to do is we've just, let me go to the top. We've just published a data story through Land Portal, looking at, from a data perspective, at some of the potential linkages or challenges around placing land degradation neutrality next to land tenure security. I won't go through the whole story because it's a short presentation time, but what I would like to do is highlight 3 or 4 quick aspects, principally showing some of the challenges and some of the potentials. So you're hopefully seeing my screen now, and I'm zooming down quickly. I'd like to stop here to start with. And what we have here, many of you may have already heard that over 100 countries have already set land LDN targets. And we highlight a few here to actually kind of show that they can be quite different in appearance. So for example, for Benin, which we'll come back to later, we, here we are. We can see the main target is the restoration of at least 50% of land degraded from 2000 to 2010, and limited to 5%, and limit to 5% the loss of non-degraded lands. Now, what we see here, we see some quite precise figures put forward, and certainly this gives the appearance of a country that is setting its targets with a significant sort of backup of data. On the other side, I can highlight Thailand, which has a much more simple aim to increase the proportion of national forest cover through reforestation and rehabilitation of degraded forest. Now, the point here is that targets are set by countries themselves. There is no enforced mandate for how they go about this. And so I think one of the challenges that there may be different reasons why this variation takes place, but one of the reasons can be that there is a differing accessibility to data to inform these targets. So obviously this makes a significant challenge in terms of how we go about sort of coordinated approach to LDN. For my second, now I'd like to move on to a data view.
You have 2.5 minutes left.
Okay, we're halfway through. Thank you. So yes, I'd like to highlight the WOCAD website here for, I think it's a very interesting view of land degradation data, of satellite data. What they have here is a dividing line, and this will slowly load, you see, on both sides. And you can actually pick out of, I think, 16 different data sets. And you can click on individual countries more specifically, and you can see already, as I move between, the data from left to right is quite different. And these colors correspond to here. I'm not going to go into great detail. The point being is that there is a wealth of mapping data, brilliant mapping data out there, but there are many different ways to interpret it, different parameters to set, and so different ways that policy could be set. And I think this is a really good example of trying to work with the uncertainties. But of course, what we don't have are the sort of more kind of nuanced social economic drivers of why this degradation is happening. Now, when it comes to supporting data on land tenure, it's more problematic. I highlight Prindex as a very good data set on land tenure insecurity, but this is at country level predominantly. And so it's very hard to map against this very more specific degradation data. So there are major challenges putting together these kind of two fields in data terms. And for my last area, I think what we do in the data story is highlight a case study put together by TMG Research and APIC for forest area in northern Benin. And this is very interesting in that with using very localized household survey data, they really highlight how communities are operating in the forests and in many cases have land for 30 years that is unrecognized. There is a set of fees for land use through a participatory forest management plan. But actually, what often happens is that forest officers are charging up to 10 times the amount unofficially for residents in the area to be able to use that land. And that's creating much tension. Now, together with a zero tolerance policy of much reforestation work, what we see in this case is a major sort of a gap between recognizing tenure and producing reforestation projects for to solve land degradation.
I fear you have to wrap up.
Okay, so I'll finish in a couple more sentences. And so I think what we conclude is that it's very interesting that this kind of localized research can lead to very specific data that can cross sites and involve communities who can gain tenure security from their involvement in LDN projects. So there's more in the data story. I do invite you to take a look, and I'll leave it there, handing back to Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Also, I think particularly thank you for blending the different types of data that exist. So I think congratulations for a job well done. If you want to explore the data story yourself, Lillian has posted the link in the chat. And my dear colleague Kader Baba, I've seen him as the participant. So if you post questions in the Q&A session or in the chat, he might be able to respond to you as well. Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation. Now, moving to the other panelists. First of all, I'd like to introduce Marioldi Sanchez, who is the manager of the Forest Alliance at ADER, former UNCCD Civil Society Organization panel member. We have Elizabeth Brillant, who's a senior policy analyst at Global Institutions, Global Affairs Canada. Elizabeth steps in for Martin, who begs your pardon for not being able to be with us, but he's in plenary. And last but not least, we have Ulrich Apel, who is the senior environmental specialist in the Global Environment Facility. My first question goes to you, Marioldi. Marioldi, NIME has presented examples of how data on LDN and land tenure can progressively be linked, and that this offers a basis for action to address these often, let's say, unrelated worlds of tenure and sustainable land management that also Aurélie has referred to in the beginning of her presentation. Now, the CSO panel was crucial in bringing the tenure issue to the UNCCD convention and has been actively involved in the consultations of the technical guide. What do the CSOs, what does IDA see as the most important elements of the technical guide?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you also for the invitation to this side event. Yes, indeed, the civil society organizations have been promoting land tenure security as a key element to be considered for addressing land degradation, and in the context of the adoption of the voluntary targets for land degradation neutrality, land tenure becomes even more crucial. And this is the reason why we actively promoted the adoption of a UNCCD COP decision on land tenure that could open a pathway for further discussions and action within the UNCCD. As an example is the technical guide. So, well, regarding the technical guide, specifically during the last UNCCD COP15 held in Abidjan in May, we CSOs discussed on the potential contributions of the technical guide. And I would say that one of the most important elements that we have identified is that the technical guide adopts these three key considerations to be followed up by the countries for the design and implementation of all LDN initiatives. Legitimate tenure rights, the first one, consultation and participation, and gender responsive approaches. For us, this is very important because without respecting the rights of all peoples using the land, including women, as well without a participation of all these diversity of actors in decision-making processes regarding to the land, it will be impossible to achieve land degradation neutrality targets. Therefore, for us, civil society supporting local communities on the ground, the inclusion of these aspects as the key considerations to be mainstream in the implementation of LDN gives an important message to the UNCCD parties, to the stakeholders, and also provides an important framework for the application of the guide at national level. This is the most important element for us, and I would also like to highlight that it's important that the guide is linking its pathways, the pathways that has been also presented now, with the relevant UNCCD COP decisions and with the VGGT's guidelines. So this is important in terms of providing the context of the international agreements that have led to the guide. And this will help to ensure that all the stakeholders engaged, maybe some of those has not been a part of the design and a participatory process, but they are going to be the ones responsible for the implementation, the application. So it will be important for them to have a better understanding of the background, and this can make better alignment at national level also. And finally, yes.
I'll give you a second chance in a bit. May I cut you short here, or finish your sentence, and then I'll move on.
Yes, just to finalize that also we find in all the guide important topics like governance to manage commons, supporting collective action. So those are also very important elements from the point of view of CSOs. And that's we recognize the value of its inclusion in the guide. Having also a specific pathway for addressing women tenure rights is very relevant. So I will leave you there. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you, Marioldi. Elizabeth, thank you very much for stepping in very last minute. So we are very grateful to have you. Thank you, really. I'd like to begin by asking you about Canada's feminist international assistance policy, basically building on the point that Marioldi has just made. What does this feminist international assistance policy imply in terms of financing projects on land rights, inclusive governance, and land degradation neutrality?
Thank you. Yes, good morning, everyone. Martin sends his regards. As already mentioned, he's busy with the CFS plenary. So it's a pleasure for me today to share a few thoughts on Canada's experience in this space supporting land degradation neutrality efforts with a feminist lens. Before diving in, I'd just like to commend the UNCCD, FAO, and their partners for developing a practical and context-specific guide that emphasizes local ownership and participatory governance approaches to reach the UNCCD's objectives. We already know that in many countries, marginalized groups and people in vulnerable situations, in particular women, have unequal and limited opportunities to access or own land. According to a UNCCD study released last May at the COP, 102 countries denied women's land rights. And this is pretty staggering, considering that women produce the majority of the world's food and are active across food systems. To help address this, Canada supports gender transformative approaches to advance gender equality, sustainable agricultural growth, and equitable resource management in alignment with Agenda 2030. Nationally, our feminist international assistance policy, also referred to as the FIAP, is underpinned by a human rights-based approach. So what does this all mean in practice? Well, we're making use of gender-based analysis to ensure that the differentiated impacts of efforts on women and men are taken into account throughout the project cycle. So from the perspective of land rights and inclusive governance, this means a greater emphasis on interventions that, one, support local women's organizations and movements that advance women's rights, Number 2, support women's leadership and decision-making to build resilience and sustainably manage resources. And 3rd, strengthen legal systems and promote reforms that eliminate all forms of discrimination. And in order to deliver on these priorities, we have 3 main channels of programming and a range of investments, partnerships, and advocacy efforts. So I'll just touch on 3. The first one is focused on UNCCD. So we are providing institutional support over a number of years to strengthen the implementation of the Gender Action Plan, which includes a big component on women's lands rights and access to resources. While initial activities have focused on awareness raising and training, we are excited that the UNCCD will aim to partner with interested countries to facilitate progress at the national and subnational levels in this space. In terms of bilateral engagement, we also support in-country programming. And for example, we are supporting the Canadian NGO Soko Devi in Colombia to create sustainable livelihoods by increasing the income of smallholder farmers that farm cacao. And the project supports women's empowerment and their participation in production by helping to access land titles and address gender violence and strengthen their leadership ability.
I would also like to give you the second question. Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, I'm really sorry for making everybody rush through the presentations, but we have a very rich program and we want to make sure that our good colleague Miriam at the end not left with 30 seconds, but a little bit more. Thanks a little bit.
No worries. I'll just say we also have research efforts and we just want to build on food systems resilience and inclusive land governance as a prerequisite for this. So I'll wrap up there. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Uli, you're up next. The GEF supports about, if I understood correctly, 160 projects to address land degradation. And I think it's sort of also the questions that show up in the Q&A box refer to the financing question. So how does the GEF ensure that the LDN projects that are supported by the GEF actually correspond with the VGTs? Uli, the floor is yours. And it's great to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and hello, everyone. Thank you for the question and the opportunity. First of all, let me start that the strategy of the GEF in our land degradation projects is fully aligned with the LDN concept. So we are supporting the implementation of the UNCCD agenda through the LDN concept. And as you know, in the LDN guidelines, also the VGGT are playing an important role. They are referenced. It's a fundamental principle, good governance and land tenure. So we are using mostly this pathway 5 that was mentioned by Aurélie to engage in comprehensive land use planning, including land tenure security. This is really a common element in GEF projects, and we really consider the VGGT as a best practice and really an important guideline to apply in project design and implementation. But an important point really is these are guidelines for governments, right? So they are there for governments to help their people to safeguard the rights to own and to access land. So what we can basically do is to make them aware, encourage the application, and help with all the interactions that are necessary in the process, with interactions with local communities, with CSO, with indigenous people, and with all the stakeholders in the process. And if I can switch quickly to finance, I think one big opportunity we all have is to increase VGGT-related investments. And because this really also needs investments in, for example, in mapping, in capacity building, the measurement tools, cadastral services, for example. So there's also a field where really investments are needed to bring this basically to the next level and to encourage application of the guidelines. So that's all for the time being from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Uli. Marioli, I'd like to get back to you. And the question is, how do we ensure that the financing question that Uli has mentioned? I mean, there often needs to be accountability to ensure that financing goes into the right direction. And I think I'm pointing this question at you because I think I would like to learn from you, or probably the participants as well, what would be the role of CSOs in the implementation of the technical guide? How do you see your supporting role in supporting governments and actually taking the implementation of the technical guide forward?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, currently a lot of civil society organizations are directly providing support and technical assistance on sustainable land management, not only to local communities, but also to governmental organizations and also to private sector organizations, sometimes at local, at national level, which means that CSOs have direct relation with the key stakeholders, particularly with local communities, of course, and also that the CSOs manage information on good practices, traditional knowledge, new technologies emerging from the ground, and also in many cases, we have technical resources, logistic capacities, social support in areas which other organizations have some limitations maybe to operate or to reach the stakeholders in the ground. This is particularly at subnational level. So on this sense, CSOs can play a very strategic role in raising awareness on the technical guide, first of all, at different levels, engaging state and non-stakeholders in the process of technical awareness. We can also support reaching these local land users that have limitations, for example, to access internet, language barriers. It's very important to know that by the end of the year, we will have the guide in Spanish, in other languages, but still it's important for some stakeholders to have this support for adapting the technical guide for the local context. And we can also play an important role facilitating the process of making the guide more meaningful and pragmatic for every national context, every national challenge, and particularly to the subnational level, I must say, local level, direct land users. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you, Marioli, and thank you for highlighting the capacity building function, the translation function of how to actually use the guide at the local level. I think this is often a step that really is missed out in our discussions. Elizabeth, the UNCCD land tenure decision, or the decisions now after COP15, offer the opportunity to mainstream land governance in other sectors and funding portfolios. Something basically, the session is basically an expression of that. How would you assess the opportunities and challenges that this mainstreaming brings for investments in responsible land governance proper?
Thanks for the question. Yes, there's lots to unpack on this one, and I think I'll touch on points that have already been made by other panelists. But maybe just first off, I'd like to note that we appreciate the UNCCD's ongoing work on inclusive land governance, and we were pleased to support the first ever land tenure decision at COP14 and work since then. And so, as already mentioned, parties have agreed that work is further needed to integrate land tenure into the convention's implementation from both a policy and programming perspective. So I'll share a few thoughts now in terms of the challenges and opportunities that we see with mainstreaming. So on the challenges side, I'll start by noting that national level coordination can often be a challenge. Institutions often operate in silos and compete for limited resources. And as well, like in our own department, resources and responsibilities are spread across various institutions and at different levels. So this makes for some difficult work ahead of us, and comprehensive issues are sometimes difficult to respond to in a coordinated way. In terms of complexity, the situation is made even further difficult when you consider complexities on the ground. So governance questions can be incredibly hard to address and are deeply affected by socioeconomic dynamics unique to each community. So therefore, there needs to be a strong buy-in across the board at the political level, as well as inclusive participatory processes to ensure local ownership and sustainability. I'd just quickly also like to touch on the point raised by Daniel on data, just to say that the governance data gaps do exist, meaning that we have limited ability to sometimes get a clear picture of the situation. And so it's important for decision makers and development partners alike to have knowledge of the dynamics on the ground to ensure that LDN initiatives at the very minimum do no harm. On the opportunities side, we see the Sustainable Development Agenda as remaining a top priority in the coming years, and land and rights feature prominently throughout the SDGs, so there are natural linkages there for integration. Looking at rising food malnutrition and hunger rates, they've been further fueled by a range of shocks, and most recently the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so these compounding shocks demonstrate the urgent need to increase resilience by promoting food systems transformation, and inclusive land governance is key for this, as well as poverty eradication. Lastly, I'd like to mention that while public financial resources are increasingly strained, there are opportunities, I think in particular on the climate finance side, and this is linked a bit to the Jeff's work as well. So whether focusing on adaptation or mitigation efforts, policies and programming can help prevent further ecosystem degradation and also bolster resilience for land users. So I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And again, I apologize for being the one to rush, to make you rush. I would ask our colleagues from FAO, in particular the Land Tenure Unit, to please have a look in the Q&A box. There are some questions that are not necessarily targeted or directed at this panel, but also refer to more country-level questions, for example, regarding implementation in Cameroon and the general principles of good governance. I see Aurélie has already taken this on. Francesca, if you could also direct your attention to the Q&A box, this would be great. So with this, let's say, rather logistical note, I'd like to come back to you, Oli. Elizabeth has already referred to the project cycle, and I think what would be important for us and for others to learn is from Jeff's experience, blending the world of tenure and sustainable land management is, as Elizabeth has just said, extremely complex. So what are from your point of view the success factors in addressing tenure in project design and implementation? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's really a package, and many of the elements have been already mentioned by other panelists. It's we need good governance is key. We need solid data, attention to stakeholder involvement, CSOs, local communities. Agenda was mentioned as a very important element, which we can also confirm from our experience. And knowledge management is also key among countries to sharing knowledge and experiences on these common management challenges of securing land tenure. One thing that I think we can also still improve and work on is to create a better track record of those success stories. For example, Vietnam is often mentioned as a success story. Also, I happen to know this case. There are probably many others, but really, this country has managed to turn around the degradation story, so increase their forest cover. And I think one of the success factors is their attention also to securing land tenure, good land use planning and land allocation. And I think there are probably other success stories out there. We need to create a better track record also to show other countries that's the way to go if they want to address degradation and turn around the deforestation issues in their countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Oli, for your concise answer. And I think I would have one question to all panelists, Daniel, Marioldi, Elizabeth, and Oli. The brevity of the session basically requested us to really speak in general terms about the global context. Maybe you could leave an example or one telling case in the chat box so that our participants have a chance to really follow up what you mean. For example, when you speak about Vietnam, or Marioldi, when you speak about the implementation of the local level. So if you could leave examples that would illustrate these general points, I think this would be very helpful. And if you would use the chat box for this purpose, then everybody can participate from or can benefit from that knowledge. I'd like to thank you to the four of you. You have been a marvelous panel. And now for me, it's time to move from global to local or regional. And I am very happy to present our following two panelists. The first one is Asha Ngebe, who is the Upper East Regional Director of the Environmental Protection Agency of Ghana and UNCCD's National Focal Point, and Ombretta Tempra, who is the Human Settlements Officer and Land Specialist of the Global Land Tool Network and the Arab Land Initiative. So warm welcome to the two of you. And I'd like to begin with you, Asha. The technical guide was very well received. Sorry. The technical guide was very well received by the African group at COP15. And I think I would want to ask you to please be so kind to recall for participants the main messages the African countries want to convey with regards to the implementation of the technical guide.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody, and thanks for inviting me to be part of you. In fact, the technical guide, as mentioned, was well accepted by the African group in Abidjan. But then we have some outstanding issues that we brought forward. We call for further capacity building and awareness creation to mobilize proposed concrete actions needed in the guidelines documents. We also call for a concerted effort on the investment into the integration effort, which we see to be very, very key. And also we call for an established partnership. You know, in implementing the VGGT, you know, collaboration is key. And also we call for the gathering of relevant data. Now, we've seen the need for funding. I mean, attracting the needed funding from public and private investors to implement the VGGT guidelines. It's one of the key issues, because this is, in terms of Africa, assessment of environmental and social risks involved in the implementation of the achievement of the LDN. It is and its integration, it's very important for us. Now, there are issues about Ghana's example. If I'm giving the go-ahead, I can mention those examples that we think can be relevant in assisting the vulnerable groups and the women in our communities in getting access to land and their land's rights. Now, we recently implemented the Sustainable Land and Water Management project, and supporting women to get access to land was very key. Now we introduced an innovative approach where women became financially empowered in a way. And so they no more would depend on their husbands or any other person to support them on their farms. And so this, in a way, you know, helped them to get access to land. In fact, we introduced what we call the Village Savings and Loans Association concept, where we inculcated in them the spirit of investment. And so they are able to invest, and that funds are used to carry out sustainable land and water management practices under the project. We also had this bottom-up approach under the Sustainable Land and Water Management project. In every community, we have the Community Water Management Committee. And so this Watershed Management Committee, we have at least 3 women in that committee. And so within that committee, they champion the cause of women access to land, women access to, in fact, fertile land, so that, you know, they will not be relegated to marginal lands. In the first issue, I made mention of finance. Whilst they are financially independent, empowered, now they have access to land without, they have a say in that in every community. Now, under the project,
but may I ask you if you could turn to the other project in the second round of questions? Sorry for cutting you short, but I would like to hear from Bretta and the regional perspective first. Sorry, sir, for cutting you short. Umbretta, you have heard from the African parties and already from the very specific concrete national level in Ghana. How would you see that with regional initiatives like the Arab Land Initiative, Jesus Christ, Arab Land Initiative can boost the implementation of the technical guide in the region?
Thank you so much, Jess. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think regional initiatives are basically an intermediate step to bring global normative framework and tools closer to the member states and adapt perhaps to the language or the specific interests and priorities for implementation in a particular region. And also, as also previous speaker was saying, being a closer platform where lessons among countries can be shared for the purpose of learning what has worked and creating the momentum for joining forces for implementation. The Urban Initiative was created in 2016 to empower and develop capacity of national and regional champions so that they are better able to act on land governance in their communities and countries. And indeed, this national and local ownership is crucial for tenure security, good land governance, and land degradation neutrality, because such engagement really to be successful will need to be sustained over the years or even over the decades, and only local leadership can ensure that. So when it's not possible to go straight to country level yet, the regional dimension is a useful way to actually start doing 4 main actions I think are useful to be done by regional initiative. One is to develop and document field knowledge on land degradation neutrality, with local researchers, but also grassroots and practitioners. And I just put in the chat a report actually we just released today on land degradation and conflict with case studies from Sudan, Jordan, and Niger. Secondly, as also was mentioned by FAO, the technical guides calls for 3 types of assessments to prepare the grounds for land degradation neutrality intervention: biophysical, gender, and land tenure assessments. And regional initiatives have undertaken some preliminary land tenure assessment. For example, I just want to recall the one from the African Union, the NELGA, Network on Excellence on Land Governance in Africa, which just released a regional land tenure assessment for North Africa, and ourselves at the initiative, we are releasing soon one in 11 countries on the Middle East, which can prepare the ground to go then now down to country and local level. Thirdly, definitely capacity development is a key area that was mentioned by previous speakers, and this can be done in form of trainings, but also by adding land degradation neutrality content into the curricula that are taught in the universities and in the regional training institute that exist already in the regions. And lastly, also Aurélie presented the fact that land administration tools are key to prepare the ground for land degradation neutrality intervention. This I think was pathway 6 in the guidelines, and definitely at the regional level, we can give technical support on fit-for-purpose land administration and land administration intervention at the national and local level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Umbretta. And my dear panelists, we have only some minutes left because I really would want to give our dear colleague Miriam the chance to really wrap up. So Asha, I apologize for cutting you short. You were presenting another country example. So you have 1 minute to present that example, and then Umbretta, I turn to you. Asha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And then we do continuous education. We educate the traditional authorities, the landowners, so that we're able to break down the cultural barriers that limit women's rights and access to land. And we have read the story of Sierra Leone, and we've realized that the implementation of the VGGT hinges mostly on multi-stakeholder approach. And this is an area Ghana will love to adopt. And then finally, funding is very key. whatever we do, whatever we plan, it is funding. If you don't have the resources, I mean, nothing can come your way. And so we call for, increased funding so that we can successfully implement the VGGT. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asha. And I think these panels are also a chance to connect. So I know that the GEF replenishment was just precluded. So maybe you want to connect with Uli, who could advise you on how to actually best channel then GEF resources to that purpose. Ombretta, the VGT, and I think this was discussed last week also at length, are based on binding human rights treaties and human rights standards. And from your point of view, what is it that Regional Alliance could do to address the sometimes challenging question of enhancing accountability by the state vis-a-vis its citizens, which is often necessary if we want to move ahead with implementing responsible land governance?
Thank you for these tricky questions, I would say. But we know that binding human rights treaties are monitored basically through global processes, the Human Rights Council, the complaint procedure, and the special procedures like as the special rapporteurs. And then there are universal periodic reviews where countries routinely present for discussion their reports, and also the UN and non-state actors present their own. So in a way, this is really global and national processes. However, there are some scope for one. For example, an idea could be to table for discussion at the regional level the reports and the recommendation from the universal periodic reviews, because neighboring country might have similarities that they want to work together on. Then very importantly, there are the regional intergovernmental bodies like the UN Economic Commission, the African Union, League of Arab States, and others that have a really very useful advocacy role in tabling priorities for discussion at their annual ministerial conferences. So these processes are all animated basically by national partners and professionals that are from the national level. And I think there is a role by the regional platform, to create awareness and build the capacity of those experts, national stakeholders, to better understand the aspects that are quite technical sometimes, like land degradation neutrality, and collect information and report and monitor them within these, national and global processes that monitor the human rights treaties, but also the SDGs and the voluntary guidelines. Thanks. That would be my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ombretta. Before Miriam, I give you the floor, I would like to turn the attention of our distinguished participants to the survey link, to the SurveyMonkey link that Neil has posted in the chat. So if you feel like leaving your comments, we would be grateful if you could do so using the SurveyMonkey. And I think I have only one question that's left, or two questions that are left. One, Daniel, if you could have a look at the Q&A box by Helena on data on the UK. If you could please be so kind to have a look at that. And then we have a question from Dimitri from Gabon, and I see Aurélie is taking that on, so I shall not comment on that right now. Now, Miriam, I've tried my best to ring fence and protect your time, really. So you have 5 minutes left to conclude this session before my final words. Miriam, the floor is yours. Sorry for everyone who doesn't know Miriam. Miriam is the chief of the Policy and External Relations division at UNCCD. Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jess. And first of all, I want to thank all of our partners and the panelists for these wonderful and very thought-provoking presentations. I was taking extensive notes, which I actually consider homework for the Secretariat in fulfilling the mandates that our parties have given us to advance the tenure and land degradation work streams. I mean, I don't really know where to start because there's a lot of things that are on the table, but let me try to unravel my thoughts in a very succinct manner before Yes tells me I have 30 seconds left. Number one, data. And thank you, Daniel, for the presentation. Data is probably what we are lacking the most. or perhaps the connection between the data and the action. I mean, to me, one of the questions like, do we know from the LDN targets, what's the status of that land? Is that land owned by somebody? Is that national land? Is that part of municipalities, etc.? And the short answer, I am very sorry to say, and a little bit embarrassed too, is no, we do not know. And we may benefit incredibly from researching, from asking our parties, asking partners, governments to provide this data that will allow us to better support the policy conversations that they will have. Another reason why data is so important is because the tenure conversation is per se very difficult. I mean, tenure looks differently in every single part of the world, and then inside the country, we have 197 parties, and then it looks different for each of them. And then inside the party, there are so many different regimes and so many ways related to land rights that it's very, very difficult to have the conversation. This takes me to the beauty of the VGGTs and the wonder, the miracle of the decision in the context of the UNCCD. Why? Because these two processes, the Committee of Food Security and then the Conference of the Parties, managed to bring all these different national positions into this something that is universal, that is, yes, general, but that is flexible and adaptable enough for everybody to benefit from it. And then in the case of the UNCCD, it is very clear from all the interventions that once you have secure tenure rights, the land restoration agenda is going to look much better. The outlook is going to be much better. I mean, capacity building, another issue, access to technology, and everything has to do with the collective actions that we take to advance towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I was reading very recently, and this was actually a surprise to me, that the UNCCD, contrary to the UNFCCC and the Convention on Biological Diversity, which are the sisters of this convention, they are 3 Rio conventions. The UNCCD is considered in many academic areas a sustainable development convention, and probably the first one. So if you think about it and you couple it with the discussion around tenure rights and around human rights in general, then we actually have a very, very clear pathway as the pathways of the VGGT to advance in achieving sustainable development for all. It's a self-fulfilling circle. So we are concerned with the restoring the health to our soils, to our lands, for our own development, to guarantee the subsistence of humans on this earth. But on the other hand, by doing that, you are actually promoting a better, a more harmonious and a better, the well-being of people around the world. I don't want to do any disservice to anyone by not quoting. I will just refer to Juliet's remarks on youth and on the importance of bringing youth into this conversation, as they are the ones who have to unfortunately clean up the mess and carry the torch towards the future. And I will finish with one quote. It's very terrible that I am quoting ourselves. I'm going to quote the Global Land Outlook 2nd edition. This is our flagship publication for the UNCCD. But in our 6 key message of the summary for decision makers, we wrote, this is about putting people front and center. And then I think this is something that the tenure workstream reminds us every time. Yes, the UNCCD is about land, but in reality, it is about people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam. And I hope that all participants really enjoyed the session. I would like to thank you for taking the time to participate and attend. I think it really speaks to 2 key questions. The first one is, how do we actually link the 2 sometimes challenging worlds of land tenure and sustainable land management. And I think not all land degradation neutrality plans are already living up to the spirit of the voluntary guidelines. So I think the session that we've presented here today is actually a segue to start a discussion on how to better align. And second, the implementation of the voluntary, or the further application of the voluntary guidelines should, of course, be fostered further within the context of the UN Committee on World Food Security. But I think the session has also shown that there are other global processes that can be used to advance responsible land governance in line with the principles of the Tenure guidelines. I think this is what the session has shown. I would like to thank my fabulous panelists and speakers for their time and their contributions, and to all participants for staying with us. I wish you all a very good day or remaining day, and take good care. Bye-bye.